Today I will be showing you how to paint this ocean and pier scene. To start off, I will be drawing out the horizon line. Then I will make a mark where the vanishing point is in the center of that horizon line with a little dot. To create the pier, I used my ruler and lined it up to that vanishing point and created a triangle. I then mark where I want the end of the pier to be, and once again, using the same vanishing point, I am creating the boards by adding more lines inside the triangle. Here I am just erasing the vanishing point and adding some details such as some horizontal lines for the boards on the pier. Next, I will do the sky. For this, I'm using some cobalt blue. I load up my brush with a lot of pigment and go across the top. Then I will get rid of a little bit of that pigment by dipping my brush in the water. The sky gets lighter as it gets closer to the ground, so I'm making it lighter by getting rid of some of that pigment. To make the clouds, I make sure to wipe off my brush, and while the paper is still wet, I will lift off some of the pigment on the paper. Once the paper is a little more dry, you can add back in some of the pigment to add some dimension to your clouds. For the water, I'm starting off by using masking fluid. If you don't have any, don't worry, I will show you how you can still create the same effect with acrylic paint, which we will do at the end. I will use a prong from a plastic fork to apply this. If you use a brush, just be sure to use an older one because the masking fluid dries really quickly and will damage the brush. Here I am drawing out some organic shapes connected to each other, and you want to make sure to vary the thickness of the lines in different areas. Once the masking fluid has dried, I will be going over the water section using a base color of this turquoise and blue mixed together. I made the paint lighter the closer it is to the viewer because here we will be able to see the yellow sand, which we will add in a little bit. Then I'm using the same dark blue from this smaller palette to add to the farthest area of the sea. However, ultramarine will also work for this part. This yellow color I used is called Sandridge in this smaller palette, but you can also use yellow ochre. I'm going to paint small organic shapes that don't touch but work around each other about a third of the way up the page. Make sure you don't rub too hard because you don't want to rub off the masking fluid just yet. Then I'm using the turquoise and blue mixture to make more of those shapes, but only doing about 1.5 to 2 rows of this color. Once this first layer is completely dry, I'm going to add another layer of these colors on top of the first shapes. I wanted to add a more light green color to the sand area, so I added a little bit of the turquoise color to the yellow. Then in just some of the shapes, I am adding smaller shapes with that green color. I'm also just darkening the blue shapes with the same color as the first layer. While this is drying, I'm going to go back to the sky and add some more clouds. I'm using the same cobalt blue and going back over the sky. Then, with a damp brush, I am swirling around some of the spots to soften up the new layer of paint to look more like fluffy clouds. Next, I'm going to do a light layer of color over the top of the water. In the back, I will use the turquoise, and then closer up, I will do the yellow color. You want these colors to be pretty watered down so it doesn't make these first layers disappear. You also don't want to rub the paper too hard either. Just use a big brush and lightly go over the sea part. I will add in the darker blue in the back again as well. While that is drying, I will move on to the pier where I will use a dark brown color. You can also use quinacridone rust or any brown that you have. If it's too light, just add some blue such as ultramarine to make it darker. Here I am doing a dry brush technique where I have a lot of pigment on my brush but not a lot of water, so it creates that textured look. Once that first layer has dried, I am going back in and adding some more details like the grain of the wood and the shadows on the vertical pieces of wood. To create the highlights on the vertical pieces of the wood, I am using a damp brush with no pigment and lightly rubbing the part I want to make lighter. Now I'm going to take the masking fluid off. I like to use a small piece of masking tape and squish it into a ball to rub it off. However, you'll want to make sure that everywhere you're rubbing is completely dry first to avoid any smudging or smearing. Next, I am softening some of those harsh white lines by rubbing sections with the turquoise color. Make sure not to cover all the white lines because you still want some white areas. Now that the masking fluid has been removed, I will add the reflection of the pier on the water. I mixed ultramarine blue and a neutral tint to create a dark blue color. So if you didn't have masking fluid, here's where you can use white acrylic paint. I'm using a small rounded brush and creating those small squiggly lines in the same way as I did using the masking fluid. As the view gets farther away, they get less detailed, so I did more straight thin lines. If you rubbed out too many of your masking fluid lines, you can also use this paint to add back in those lines as well. And that is it. If you try this out, I would love to see it, so be sure to tag Bright Light Studio on Instagram. New videos come out every Friday, so if you want to see more watercolor tutorials, be sure to like and subscribe, and thanks so much for watching!